Senator from Illinois.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent to address the Senate as in morning business.
Senator from Illinois is recognized as if in morning business.
Mr. President, there is understandable interest and attention to the most favored nation status of the People's Republic of China, and I will address that at a future session of the Senate. But there are broader issues in that region that should concern us, that deserve our attention, and I will take this opportunity to discuss those. Recently, I had a chance to visit Taiwan, officially known as the Republic of China, and Hong Kong. I'd like to share with my Senate colleagues a few observations as well as my concerns about that area of the world. On Taiwan, there has been remarkable economic and political progress. I met with President Lee Teng-hui, who is a native of Taiwan, the first native Taiwanese to serve as president. I came away with the impression that Taiwan has a solid leader who has shown a remarkable ability to pull the nation together as he moves ahead in civil liberties as well as economic progress. People who once were political prisoners are now leaders of an opposition political party. There is universal recognition for the civil liberties progress that has been made. The majority party was reestablished in Taiwan by Generalissimo Chiang Kai-shek in 1949 and later headed by his son, Chiang Ching-kuo. Their political party, the KMT, continues to be the dominant political force in the island, but a vigorous opposition now exists. The average income in Taiwan is $8,000 a year, compared to approximately $300 in the People's Republic of China. Taiwan has the world's largest surplus of foreign currency reserves and is the 13th largest trading country in the world. What's also impressive is that there has developed a healthy middle class and fewer of the huge disparities between rich and poor that many nations have. The difference between the wealthiest 20% and the poorest 20% on Taiwan is a 4-to-1 ratio. By comparison, here in the United States, our ratio is 9-to-1. We could learn from our friends in Taiwan. But there are significant economic needs: more long-term investment, improved communications, improved transportation, and other things that you would expect a nation to need that has shown dramatic progress economically. United States policy toward Taiwan has been inconsistent with our ideals. It has been dictated by an excessive desire to please the government of the mainland. I want to get along with the PRC, but we will not earn respect by not standing up for our ideals. Successive administrations in the United States since President Carter have tried to maintain a balance between our official relations with Beijing and unofficial ties to Taipei. Those unofficial relations with Taiwan have been significant. Perhaps most important, we are the only major industrial nation willing to sell Taiwan the weapons that Taiwan needs for self-defense and deterrence. But even in that area, our support has been declining, and our other relations with Taiwan have been cool and distant. Now the time has come to tilt that balance more toward Taiwan in recognition of their impressive democratization and in sad acknowledgement of the backward steps taken by the repressive regime in Beijing. Two ways to do that are, number one, increase the officiality of our relationship by allowing contact between our cabinet-level officials, and two, supporting Taiwan's admittance to international organizations in the technical and economic financial areas. Our traditions are for individual civil liberties and self-rule by the people. If we do not stand solidly for freedom and democracy, we don't stand for anything. While Italy, France, Ireland, and other countries send cabinet-level officials to Taiwan, we are too timid to do so. Our present weak-kneed policy grew out of a mistake that was made in going from one extreme in China policy to another. We recognized the Republic of China, Taiwan, as the government of all of China for many years. It was an illusion that did not do any good for the people of China nor for the people of the United States. Then, instead of doing what the United States did in Germany, officially recognizing that there were two governments, East Germany and West Germany, we shifted to pretending that the government of the mainland, People's Republic of China, represented all the people. We ignored the fact that the Republic of China, Taiwan, spoke for the 20 million people on Taiwan. Recognizing two Germanys was not a barrier to ultimate reunification of Germany, and a recognition of two Chinas would not have been a barrier to the ultimate unity of China. But that is now history. To shift now to a two-China policy would be disruptive and unrealistic. But it is also unrealistic not to acknowledge that there is a different government in Taiwan. And that government is infinitely closer to us in what it practices in freedom and democracy than is the government of the PRC. There are many things we can do that are short of official recognition of the government of Taiwan. The United States is now quietly supporting the admission of Taiwan to GATT. There are other international organizations where the PRC would not have a United Nations veto, and Taiwan could at least be admitted as an observer. Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation is an important new mechanism for trade and economic development in the Pacific region. Taiwan would be a natural for membership. The World Health Organization is another example. The Food and Agriculture Organization, yet another. There are ways of making clear that we regard Taiwan as a responsible member of the community of nations. The Wall Street Journal recently published an editorial suggesting that President Bush invite President Lee to the United States. I'm all for that. But President Bush probably feels it would be too awkward to invite President Lee over or to visit Taiwan. If even having the Secretary of State visit Taiwan is somehow beyond the courage of our government, at the very least, send the Secretary of Commerce to meet with officials in Taiwan, one of the world's great trading nations, or send the head of the Environmental Protection Agency, Bill Riley, to discuss substantial environmental problems that Taiwan has that ultimately affect the United States and the mainland, as well as the people of Taiwan. Our present policy of almost pretending Taiwan does not exist is anemic and could even lead to violence. I am concerned that our official posture of recognizing Taiwan as part of China puts us on very thin ice if the PRC ever decides they want to take over Taiwan through violent means. I am confident that a majority of the members of Congress would want the United States and the United Nations to respond quickly to any such aggression. But our present policy leaves that situation somewhat ambiguous. The thriving British colony of Hong Kong has achieved remarkable economic success. I was in Hong Kong only one other time as a young journalist back in 1959. The changes that have occurred in Hong Kong are dramatic, almost unbelievable. Hong Kong has the highest per capita average income of any place in that area of the world outside of Japan. The per capita income average is $12,000 a year. Prosperity in Hong Kong has spread over the border to the southern province of China. It does not mean that the people of the southern province of China have the same standard of living or the same basic liberties that the people of Hong Kong have, but Hong Kong's wealth has spilled over, and the People's Republic of China receives some of the benefit from Hong Kong's prosperity. As part of my visit to Hong Kong, I visited some of the boat people who have fled Vietnam. There are approximately 45,000 Vietnamese who are being detained in a prison-like situation in Hong Kong, where they have adequate food and medical attention, but they live in extremely cramped quarters that cause serious social problems. The United States and other nations could resolve the immediate circumstances of the 45,000 people, but unless we move on the problem that is causing people to leave Vietnam, we will not ultimately resolve anything. Achieving that goal will require an improvement in the economy of Vietnam and improvement in human rights there. That means that the United States should deal much more realistically with the government of Vietnam, including stopping the trade boycott and recognizing the government there, and we should push at the same time for Vietnam to improve its record in human rights and to fully address U.S. questions about those missing in action during the war. Unless there is movement on the economic front and on the human rights front, there will continue to be large numbers of people who will try to leave Vietnam. This is essential for resolving the problem of those detained in Hong Kong. While I was in the camp, I met a woman whose background I'm still checking on, who, when I asked her if she would return to Vietnam, replied, "No, the communists there killed my father, and if I return, they will kill me." And then she started to cry. Her fears may be unwarranted, but they are real. Until there is a change in the human rights posture of the government of Vietnam, there will continue to be a great many people who fear returning to Vietnam. When I visited the refugee camp at Whitehead, I met a British writer, Heather Stroud. Ms. Stroud gave me the background of some of the people I did meet: Nguyen Van Ho, Nguyen Van Son, Vu Dan Phi, and his family. Their stories are gripping, and I ask unanimous consent to insert their stories into the record at this point. I ask unanimous consent, Mr. President, to insert their stories in the record at this point.
That will be the order.
I've inserted these stories into the record because these are people who have been turned down for refugee status. Yet they face overwhelming problems, and I hope that we can work out something for them. Not all of the 45,000 boat people are political refugees, but some who are not now categorized as refugees are, and those I have mentioned here are illustrations of that. Ms. Stroud has provided the names and cases of some 27 about whom she knows the details and she believes are clearly political refugees. On the basis of their statements, they appear to fall into that category. But again, unless the United States changes its basic policy toward Vietnam, we will continue to proliferate this kind of problem, even if we were suddenly to admit the 45,000 who are refugees in Hong Kong to our country, which no one advocates. The policy that we now have toward Vietnam serves our national passion, but not our national interest. We need a policy that serves the national interest. Vietnam is the third largest communist country behind only China and the Soviet Union in numbers of people. Its people are desperate. And let me commend here our colleagues, Senator John McCain and Senator Bob Kerrey and Senator John Kerry, all three of whom fought in Vietnam, and all three of whom are asking for a reappraisal by our government of our policies there. I welcome the two forward steps that the administration has taken recently regarding Vietnam. Opening an office in Hanoi will improve our ability to deal with our national priority of resolving the status of those missing in action from the Vietnam War. Providing a token amount of aid to Vietnam, $1 million of humanitarian assistance for devices for artificial limbs for the people of Vietnam, will help to bring closer the day that our nation and Vietnam share a normal relationship, finally closing a painful chapter in our history. Vietnam has become more cooperative with us on the MIA POW issue. All of my suggestions for improvement in the relationship are contingent on their continuing to cooperate with us on these issues. The British are critical of the United States, saying that our policy toward Vietnam is causing much of the problem, and also that we criticize them for returning Vietnamese people, and yet we return people to Mexico and to other countries. There are differences, but there also is some validity to the British criticism. I hope we can work out a policy that brings opportunity to these people who are now virtually imprisoned and brings a little more justice, freedom, and opportunity to the people of Vietnam. Hong Kong is a vibrant city with an amazing economic growth, as I said, an average income of approximately $12,000 and an unemployment rate of 1.2%. But hanging over dynamic and vibrant Hong Kong like a heavy cloud is the agreement that has been reached between the PRC and the British on the future of Hong Kong. On July 1, 1997, Hong Kong will become Chinese territory. As we consider what should be done on granting most favored nation status to the People's Republic of China, Our concern should be the long-term impact on civil liberties in the PRC. Our friends in Hong Kong are concerned about the short-term economic impact, and I understand that. But this is one occasion when we should be looking beyond short-term considerations. The joint declaration in 1984 of Great Britain and the People's Republic of China included this language: the current social and economic systems in Hong Kong will remain unchanged, and so will the lifestyle. Rights and freedoms, including those of the person, of speech, of the press, of assembly, of association, of travel, of movement, of correspondence, of strike, of choice of occupation, of academic research, and of religious belief will be ensured by law in the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region. Private property, ownership of enterprises, legitimate right of inheritance, and foreign investment will be protected by law. There are other good provisions in it. Article 13 of Annex 1 says, religious organizations and believers may maintain their relations with religious organizations and believers elsewhere, and schools, hospitals, and welfare institutions run by religious organizations may be continued. The relationship between religious organizations in the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region and those in other parts of the People's Republic of China shall be based on the principles of non-subordination, non-interference, and mutual respect. However, on April 4, 1990, President Yang Shang-kun of the People's Republic of China issued what is called the Basic Law of the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region of the People's Republic of China. The Basic Law is a sort of constitution for Hong Kong to apply beginning July 1, 1991. When reading the Joint Declaration of 1984, there is the feeling of a great deal of self-government and autonomy granted to the 5.6 million people of Hong Kong. There are also positive things in the Basic Law, but there are other things that are deeply disturbing. For example, the Basic Law provides, and I'm quoting, any law returned by the Standing Committee of the National People's Congress of the PRC shall immediately be invalidated. That gives the dictators in Beijing the power to kill all Hong Kong legislation. When it comes to selecting members of the legislative body, we are told that it must be, quote, in accordance with the assigned number of seats and the selection method specified by the National People's Congress of China. End of quote. Immigration decisions are to be made by China, not Hong Kong. The number of persons, and again I'm quoting, the number of persons who enter the region for the purpose of settlement shall be determined by the competent authorities of the Central People's Government. End of quote. The Hong Kong Special Administrative Region, and again I quote, shall enact laws to prohibit foreign political organizations or bodies from conducting political activities in the region, and to prohibit political organizations or bodies of the region from establishing ties with foreign political organizations or bodies. End of quote. That could halt all political ties with the West, as well as Japan and Taiwan. As to selecting the chief executive for the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region, the Basic Law provides, and I quote, the method for selecting the chief executive shall be specified in the light of the actual situation in the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region and in accordance with the principle of gradual and orderly progress, end of quote. Presumably, the authorities in the People's Republic of China will determine what is in accordance with the principles of gradual and orderly progress. That the PRC views things in somewhat less than a democratic fashion is illustrated by Article 50. If the Legislative Council refuses to pass a budget or any other important bill introduced by the government, and if consensus still cannot be reached after consultations, the chief executive may dissolve the Legislative Council. Imagine a free and democratic government living with this next sentence of Article 74. The written consent of the chief executive officer shall be required before bills relating to government policies are introduced. Since the chief executive will be under the thumb of China, the PRC can not only prevent any bill from being passed, but can prevent any bill from being introduced. Toward the end of the Basic Law is Article 158. The power of interpretation of this law shall be vested in the Standing Committee of the National People's Congress of China. The courts are to comply with the interpretations of the law that come from Beijing. All of this is significant because if China is this insensitive to civil liberties in Hong Kong now and is not sensitive to the civil liberties of its own people, it is unlikely that it will be sensitive to the civil liberties of the people of Hong Kong when it suddenly takes over in 1997. There are those who argue that it is in China's economic self-interest to maintain the status quo in Hong Kong. My answer to that is, first, there is no such thing as status quo. You either will move ahead or you'll move back in civil liberties. Unless things change in China, Hong Kong will move back. The British could give one great gift to the people of Hong Kong before they leave in 1997: self-rule. Unless civil liberties are accompanied by self-rule when the PRC takes over Hong Kong, I have serious doubts whether basic civil liberties are going to be protected after 1997. Dictatorial regimes historically have not been generous to new territory they acquire. The leaders of the PRC should remember that political freedom and economic growth in Hong Kong go together, and if one is diminished, the other will be diminished. Let me assure the leaders of the People's Republic of China that just as certain as I'm standing on the floor of the Senate, if you deny basic civil liberties to the people of Hong Kong now have, the goose that lays the golden eggs, the Hong Kong economy, will lay far fewer golden eggs, and the economy of all of mainland China will be hurt. It is in the economic self-interest of the PRC that the political rights of the people of Hong Kong should be respected. But there is ample reason for fear on the part of the people of Hong Kong. Hong Kong has a legislative council, which is the parliament for the 5.6 million people. It is not too much to suggest to our friends in Great Britain that this parliament be freely elected, just as the House of Commons is. I join the members of the British Parliament who have said in clear terms that the citizens of Hong Kong are entitled to the right to choose their legislators, as are people in free countries elsewhere. Listen to what a few members of the House of Commons have said in recent years. The highly respected Edward Heath: far greater than any danger of haste is the danger of not having fully representative working government with experience by the time the handover takes place. Dennis Canavan: it would surely not be unreasonable to suggest the target that by, say, 1991, the entire Legislative Council should be directly elected on a universal franchise. The head of that council, the governor, chief executive, or whatever he is called, should also be elected from the membership of the Legislative Council. And a friend of mine of some years, George Robertson: the progress towards the more elected and representative government that is proposed in the white paper is perhaps unduly cautious. The government of Hong Kong must be ready in the 1987 review to consider holding direct elections. The danger now is not of Chinese overreaction to democratic reform, but of insufficient time before 1997 in which to create a strong, viable, locally based system which will withstand the inevitable pressure and tremors as 1997 advances. The British tradition of freedom should not be compromised at this point. That British tradition of freedom has not been expressed as fully as it should be in Hong Kong. It is symbolized by one line in a National Geographic article on Hong Kong describing, and I'm quoting, "Politics, a path of public expression long denied to Hong Kongers," end of quote. The British have generally done better. Unless there is a resolve on the part of the British and the PRC to expand the basic civil liberties of the people of Hong Kong, inevitably there will be slippage. That makes it imperative that Great Britain give as much freedom as possible to the people of Hong Kong now, so that whatever narrowing of rights takes place after 1997, there will be less jeopardy to the basic liberty of the people of Hong Kong. But it appears that is not what will happen. And I regret to say the government of the United States has not spoken out strongly in behalf of freedom for the people of Hong Kong. The surest way to preserve freedom in this type of situation is to give it away. and the British should do a better job of giving it away. The people of Hong Kong have had no serious voice in the basic law that the PRC has propounded. Even in Hong Kong today, the citizens of Hong Kong have too little voice in selecting their legislative council. Majority of membership is by various organizations, such as the Bar Association or the Medical Association. But no one pretends that those elected in this fashion are truly representative of the people of Hong Kong. Underscoring the problem in Hong Kong was an article that appeared in the New York Times Magazine of May 5, 1991, Escape from Tiananmen Square, A Chinese Odyssey, written by Nicholas D. Kristof. I'd like to quote a few sentences from that article about Liu Sheng, one of the leaders of the Chinese student democracy movement in Tiananmen Square. What Liu's two-year ordeal also underscores is the way British overseers of Hong Kong sometimes seem to be doing Beijing's bidding. Sending a democracy movement activist back to China to face the possibility of a long prison sentence is hardly in keeping with the professed British ideals of fair play and common decency. However, British authorities hold the view that the best way to manage Hong Kong is not to vex China, but to maintain stability and allow for a graceful exit in 1997. Liu seems to have been a victim of that policy. End of quote. Liu managed to escape China and get into Hong Kong, and then was turned over by the Hong Kong government to the officials of China. Listen to what the article says at this point. It was contemptible, he says. We'd been betrayed by the Hong Kong government. We were so shocked and angry, and we figured we'd be sentenced to 10 years in prison. Then follows this paragraph. The territory's British overseers have briefly and as secretly as possible provided refuge to some prominent democracy activists from China before sending them on to Europe or the United States. But the Hong Kong authorities have done this unenthusiastically, worried about the reaction from Beijing, and have systematically moved to curb criticisms about China that would upset its leadership. Hong Kong has not allowed some prominent Chinese dissidents living abroad to visit the territory. Films critical of China are censored. End of quote. If before Hong Kong becomes part of the People's Republic of China, things have not improved significantly in terms of basic freedoms, it is certain they will not improve after 1997. The British parliamentarians have suggested that their government now give the people of Hong Kong the full right to elect their legislative council should receive the backing of the United States. If that were to happen today, it would make it a little more possible that Hong Kong could have a government in which the people of Hong Kong have a real voice after 1997. While it is in China's economic best interest to avoid any curtailment of freedom in Hong Kong, when it comes to questions of basic freedom, China does not act in its own economic self-interest, Tiananmen Square being the most graphic example of that. I would like to see the British give the people of Hong Kong greater freedom and greater voice in shaping their own destiny. I would also like to see the United States government do more than sit on the sidelines, twiddling our thumbs, pretending there is no problem. We ought to stand up for freedom wherever and whenever we can. Our relationship with the British is such that while they may not appreciate our doing it, it will not sour our strong and friendly relations with the United Kingdom. The PRC can hardly be expected to show greater sensitivity to basic civil liberties and the right of self-rule if there is so little British leadership in this field. The official British reaction to the publication of the Basic Law, with its massive restrictions on the civil liberties of citizens, was that it was, quote, a remarkable document. Indeed, it is. In these days, when democratic forces are sweeping through much of the world, it is amazing to find a country like China that still does not welcome democracy and that does not even provide a fig leaf of protection to hide its harsh statements. Martin Lee, one of the most articulate government leaders I have found in any nation, who's a member of the Legislative Council of Hong Kong, representing the Bar Association, says bluntly, no United States policy towards Hong Kong currently exists. That is, unfortunately, an accurate assessment. Hong Kong has approximately $7 billion of American investment and is the world's busiest port. It is the world's 4th largest financial center and the 11th largest trading country in the world. The United States should not be indifferent to that, nor to the fate of 5.6 million people there. The People's Republic of China should understand that we have a deep concern for the situation in Hong Kong. Our administration should abandon its silence and speak openly and vigorously for the cause of freedom and democracy. That voice is needed now. In conclusion, Mr. President, I believe these steps should be taken. Number one, greater identification of this country with the government of Taiwan, which has shown in recent months and years much greater sensitivity to civil liberties. Taiwan now has a genuine democracy. Number two, the United States should modify its policy on Vietnam so that we reduce the cause of the flow of citizens from that country. As that is done, we can deal in a more realistic fashion with those who have fled the country. And number three, the United States should make clear our adherence to basic civil liberties and self-government for the people of Hong Kong now and after 1997. Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
The chair recognizes the senator from Connecticut, Senator Dodd.
Mr. President, before our distinguished colleague from Illinois may leave the floor, I just want to commend him on his statement. I think it's one of the most thoughtful I've heard in some time, and I think an accurate description of events there, and I think he's 1,000% correct in identifying the absence of a policy on Hong Kong. And I commend him for his remarks here this afternoon and would hope that our colleagues would pay attention to them and would hope that he might go a bit further and see if there isn't some possibility of formulating some sort of a legislative statement wherein this body might be able to express itself more definitively on the position he has articulated here this afternoon. I think it's an event which is no longer in the public eye. It has been absent from any real debate or discussion, and I think his comment about what authoritarian or totalitarian governments have done in the past where they have engaged in expansionist policies is absolutely correct and borne out by every piece of historical evidence, that we don't find a lessening or an opening of democratic institutions. In fact, quite the contrary, they seem to expand not only territory but also ideologically and philosophically. And I think to allow that to occur without some sort of statements or expression by this body would be a tragedy. And frankly, I just am moved by his comments and wanted to express those to him, Mr. President, before he left the floor.
Mr. President,
I'd be glad to yield to my colleague.
Yes.
Senator from Illinois.
I want to thank my colleague from Connecticut, who is a highly respected member of the Foreign Relations Committee. And I note that on the floor right now, presiding is Senator Robb, who's also a member of the Foreign Relations Committee, and Senator McConnell, who is also a member of the Foreign Relations Committee. I hope we can fashion some kind of a bipartisan statement that puts the United States very clearly on the side of freedom for the people of Hong Kong. And I will work with my colleagues who are on the floor and others on the Foreign Relations Committee to try and get that done. I thank my colleague from Connecticut.
Mr. President.